what we did in the last class? Can anybody quickly remind me where we stopped? I remember we were discussing, we discussed land revenue policies introduced by British East India Company, right? And then how the faulty policies, administrative policies, revenue policies, or any other policies introduced by this new government, that is the government of British East India Company, created new fabric, political, social, or tried to create new socio-cultural political fabric, disturbed the traditional fabric of Indian society, which resulted into many revolts, okay, or which forced the Indians to respond to the British East India Company's rule. Yes, we had started discussing Indian response to British rule. Thank you. Indian response to British rule. All right. So let me just quickly revise things here. Okay. If you look at the Indian response, I guess last time also I had drawn this particular thing, this diagram. The Indian response to British East India Company's rule can be divided into two categories. It can be divided into two categories. The first is traditional response, right? And the other is modern response. This modern, as far as the modern response is concerned, the modern response will come much later. That is, this is post 1857 till 1885. And here it is, we can roughly say early 19th century or early decades of 19th century, or let me write till 1857. We all know the famous revolt of 1857, right? Now, before starting with this modern response part, or before going ahead with revolt of, even going ahead with revolt of 1857, we had to discuss all the revolts happened prior to revolt of 1857. Now, why the major reason for all this traditional response that was exhibited prior to 1857, this, the major reason for this, or the series of civil rebellions which took place before 18 revolt of 1857, were led by deposed rulers, their descendants, uprooted and impoverished zamindars, landlords, polygars like the landed military magnates in South India, ex-retainers, and officials of the conquered Indian states. The backbone of all these rebellions, their mass base, came from the peasants, ruined artisans, and demobilized soldiers. Now, before we start with we start discussing the revolt, whatever civil rebellions happened before revolt of 1857, we need to discuss the causes of these rebellions. All right, so we are discussing traditional response. Under that, we are discussing revolts before a revolt of 1857 and causes for those revolts. I'm not discussing causes for revolt of 1857. I'm discussing causes for the revolts that took place before the revolt of 1857. Okay, causes for the civil rebellions, I'll say. All right. We have already discussed these causes, but not exactly under this particular heading. But then more or less we have already discussed that part. So what were these causes? Of course, the major cause of all the civil rebellions taken as a whole was the rapid changes the British introduced in the economy, administration, and land revenue system of India. These changes led to the disruption of the Indian agrarian society, causing prolonged and widespread suffering to among its constituents, that is, amongst the Indians. Above all, the colonial policy of intensifying the demands for land revenue. So, all first and foremost cause will be faulty land revenue policies introduced by the British East India Company. Land revenue policies. So British East India Company started intensifying their demands of land revenue and extracting as large an amount as possible, produced an upheaval for the Indian villages. Why Indian villages? Because if you remember those diagrams that we discussed in the last class, the 100% burden of all this land revenue used to fall on whose shoulders? It was borne by the peasants or the actual tillers of the land, right? In Bengal, for example, in less than 30 years, land revenue collection was raised to nearly double the amount collected by the Mughals. The pattern was repeated in the other parts of the country as British East India Company's rule spread to the different regions. So we saw how how they experimented with different land revenue policies. There was no one fixed land revenue policy throughout the year. They introduced ijaredari system or zamindari system, permanent settlement system, rayatwari system, mahalwari system, and all the pros and cons that we had discussed. This different trial and error system of land revenue aggravated the unhappiness of the farmers, which pushed them to support the leaders of these revolts. जो भी revolts हुए before 1857, those were led by the different landlords, zamindars, or erstwhile rajas, maharajas. But then the mass base was peasants and the tillers. Now, why peasants and tillers must have supported them? Because of this very reason, that the British East India Company or the British administrators never looked into the faults of their land revenue policies. They were like ki, they kept on trying, and they started designing these land revenue systems based on trial and error method. Then thousand another reason for these early revolts, thousands of zamindars or polygars lost control over their land. Loss of control over land. Loss of control. Please keep on writing this. Loss of control over land. Now, if you remember, while discussing permanent settlement system or Rayatwari Mahalwari system, we had discussed that how a British East India Company was at the helm. Then the zamindar and the zamindar will act as an intermediary, and the at the last level, it was the tiller or the actual tiller peasant of the land. But then in some of the systems, they introduce the system of uh, auction, like the highest bidder of the land used to get the zamindari. So because of this auctioning method, most of the uh, erstwhile zamindars, they lost their control over land. They lost their control over its revenue due to the extinction of their rights by the colonial state, or by the forced sale of their rights over the land, because of their inability to meet the land revenue which was demanded by the British East India Company. The zamindars and the polygars resented this loss even more when they were displaced by rank outsider government officials and the new men of money merchants and money lenders. Thus, as the old chiefs who had lost their control or who had lost their principalities, they wanted to settle their personal score with the new rulers. Here, new rulers means the British East India Company. And how they did that? By engaging in different kinds of revolts before the revolt of 1857. Another reason, please write under this heading only. I'm writing it here, but this is the in continuation with this thing. Okay. Another reason for the revolts which took place before the revolt of 1857 was the peasants and artisans who are, I won't say it is a reason, but then this why they supported. So peasants and artisans had their own reasons to rise up in arms and side with the traditional elite. Now, traditional elite means the leaders who laid these traditional response in the form of different revolts. Increasing demands for land revenue was forcing large numbers of peasants into growing indebtedness or into selling their lands. The new landlords, bereft of any traditional connect with the tenants, push the tenants to the extreme end of in case of non-payment. The economic decline of the peasantry, it was reflected in the major revolts that took place before the revolt of 1857, right? So yes, so these were the landless tillers and peasants who had to leave their own lands. Another reason was the scholarly and priestly were also active in inciting hatred and rebellion against the foreign rule. Scholarly and priestly here means the erstwhile landlords or the mindars or the rajas, the traditional rulers, the ruling elite had financially supported these religious preachers, priests, pandits, maulvis, and men of arts and literature, because British East India Company had started interfering in our religious, cultural, socio-cultural affairs as well. So as a result of all these causes, or because of all these reasons, these traditional elites supported by peasants and landless laborers or the tillers, they started revolting against the British East India Company, but in different areas. They were not located at one particular area, or this revolt was not all India level. All these revolts happened at in different regions in different time frame, not exactly in 1850s, but then before 1857. So there is no start date as such, but then all these revolts eventually culminated into one major revolt, that is the revolt of 1857. 1857 changed the entire fabric of British East India Company's administration in India. And then the second part will start, that is the modern response. All right. Now, all these revolts which took place before revolt of 1857 can be divided into three major categories. Okay, I'll just quickly draw those categories here. All right. These popular uprisings, classification of revolts before 1857. These can be divided into three categories. Okay. The first category is political and religious movement. Political, religious movements. Political, religious movements. Here, for example, you have to remember the examples, because prelims में ये questions आते हैं. Fakir uprising, sannyasi uprising or sannyasi revolt. Most famous revolt, sannyasi. Pagal Panthis. Wahhabi movement. Kuka movement, etc. All right, these are political, religious. Then the next second category is movement by deposed rulers. That is erstwhile Rajas and Zamindars. Under this category, the example can be Velu movement and Poligar uprising. Poligar, nothing but zamindars in eastern India. They were called as Poligars. Poligar rebellion is part of movement. Okay. And the third category is movement by dependents of the deposed. Movements by dependents of the deposed rulers. They were like erstwhile rulers and their dependents. Like, for example, Nana Sahib, the brother of Queen of Jhansi, his father, Peshwa Bajirao II, he was the deposed ruler. So his dependent, that is Nana Sahib, he participated in the revolt of 1857. But that is, of course, that is one example who had participated in the revolt of 1857. But then there were certain revolts which was started by such people before revolt of 1857 as well. Okay, so here you can, in example, you can write Ramushi uprising, Gadkari movement, Gadkari uprising, or Savantwadi revolt. Savantwadi revolt. Okay, so all the revolts that took place before the revolt of 1857 can be divided into these three categories. Now we will look at each of these revolts category wise. So first we will start with political religious movement. Okay, let's start with political religious movement. Political religious movement. All right. Now, political religious movements, as the name suggests, these were the nature of these movements were like they were influenced by religious uh, scholars, or because of the political interference in the religious lives of the Indians. These movements erupted in the early phase of the colonial expansion, that is, of course, before 1857. Religion provided the overall framework to locate and understand the colonial rule and articulate the resistance. The main political religious movements, like I mentioned earlier, or rather the most famous one you must have heard about, that is Sannyasi uprising or Pagal Panthis or Fakir uprising. Okay, so first we will start with the first movement that we will talk here is will be Fakir uprising. Fakir uprising. You have to remember the rough year, in roughly the year, and the most important part you have to remember was the is the category of that movement, and the place or the region where that movement took place, because the match the columns में वो बहुत बार आ जाता है. Okay, so Fakir uprising took place in Bengal, so eastern part of India. So all these movements took place in various different parts. Some movements took in eastern part, western India, north India, southern India. But the major like the epicenter of all these movements were, of course, the eastern and the northern part of India. Okay, so Fakir uprising happened in Bengal roughly the year 1776 1707. So you can see some of these movements started even prior to beginning of 19th century. Okay, so roughly who were these fakirs, or why this particular movement is called as fakir uprising? Okay, roughly the characteristic features of fakir uprising. Okay, let's discuss the characteristic feature. Who were the fakirs? So the fakirs were a group of wandering Muslim religious mendicants. They were, as the name fakir, we all know who are the fakirs. So they were the wandering Muslim religious mendicants in Bengal. So after the annexation of Bengal in 17, so if you look at the year after the annexation of Bengal in 1776, 1777, Majnun Shah, the leader of the fakirs, okay, Majnun Shah was the leader of these fakirs, began to levy contribution on the zamindars and peasants and defied the British authority. After Majnun Shah's death, Chirag Ali Shah supported after his death. So he was succeeded by Chirag Ali Shah. Okay, after his death, Chirag Ali Shah, supported by Pathans, Rajputs, and the disbanded Indian soldiers, extended the operations to the northern districts of Bengal. So basically, expansion. Two famous Hindu leaders who supported him were Bhavani Pathak and Devi Chaudrani. So you have to remember this. So Chirag Ali Shah was supported by Hindu religious leaders. Please remember their names. Bhavani Pathak and Devi Chaudhrani. Okay, so all these fakirs led by Chirag Ali Shah gained considerable strength and attacked the British factories, seized their goods, cash, arms, ammunition, and there were a number of skirmishes between the fakirs and the company's troops. The fakirs were finally brought under the control at the beginning of the 19th century. All right, so this was not one revolt as such. These were like two, three times they revolted against the Britishers. And what they did, basically, this was not exactly a revolt as such. It was the raid. They used to raid the British factories. They used to raid the British factories for arms, money, that is cash. Arms and ammunitions and cash. All right. So there was no one revolt. These were like two, three incidents where they started or they raided the British factories in Bengal. But eventually they were brought under the overall control of the British rule by force. So this revolt or fakirs were brought under control. So suppression of the revolt. इनका aim कैसे हुआ? By suppression. ये भी याद रखना है. Okay, so for every revolt, okay, I'll tell you one trick. All right. Yeah. All the like in fact in the last class I had told you, okay, whatever revolts happened before revolt of 1857, prelims में इसके ऊपर questions आते हैं. Prelims as well as mains paper one. So typical questions: which part of country, which year, who was the leader, what was the major cause, and how it ended. All right. So these five things you have to remember regarding all the revolts that took place before revolt of 1857. So while discussing these revolts, I'm focusing on these points only. You don't have to get into larger details at this level. Okay. So whatever I'm writing here, please make note of it. All right. So that is Fakir uprising. Second uprising under political religious movement is Pagalpanthis. Okay. Or before Pagalpandis, we'll take Sannyasi revolt because it is like very important revolt under political social uprising, Sannyasi uprising. We all know this or have heard about this uprising. Again, same region, Bengal, 1770 to 1820s. So you can see I am not writing one specific year here because these revolts didn't take place at at one particular one particular year, like that is revolt of 1857 happened in 1857. These revolts happened over a period of time, like over maybe they started in later decades of 18th century, ended early or got suppressed early decades of 19th century, so on and so forth. So there is no one particular year. That is another characteristic feature of these revolts. Okay, all right. So features. What are the features of these revolts? Sannyasi uprising, as the name suggests, was led by the Hindu Naga sadhus or sannyasis. Hindu, Naga, and Giri sannyasis. Sannyasis, sadhus. Okay, so these sannyasis or these sadhus, they were the armed rebellions, or they were the armed rebels. Erstwhile, they were the part of they were part of Nawab's army, part of armies of Nawab of Awadh, Nawab of Awadh, Nawab of Awadh. Then they joined Marathas and Rajputs. So they were not always sannyasis as such, they were part of the armies. But then once these armies were disbanded, they didn't have any other means but to become sannyasi. But then they were like always armed rebels, or they were very well trained in arms and ammunitions. The immediate cause, so the immediate cause for this particular revolt, immediate cause for the Sannyasi rebellion. Immediate cause for the Sannyasi rebellion was restrictions imposed on the pilgrims from the towns, leading to series of conflict between the large bands of sannyasis and the British East India Company or British forces in Bengal. Okay, so taxes, or rather restrictions, not taxes, and restrictions imposed on pilgrims. Okay, because it was against their religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. So the British East India Company had started restricting um, pilgrims visiting the holy places in Bengal. So the sannyasis raided the English factories, collected contributions from the towns, and like because they had imposed those restrictions, or they started collecting money in a way. So what they did, these sannyasis, they started raiding the British factories as a symbol of their resistance to the restrictions imposed by visiting the holy places, that is Hindu holy places. Okay, but then this continued for more than half a century. You can look at the years here, 1770s to 1820s, nearly half a century long strife. The sannyasi uprising eventually ended. How it ended? In the second quarter of 19th century, end happened through suppression. It was not a peaceful end. So rebellions or revolts, how they ended, that can also be a question. So it happened through violent suppression. कौन करेगा suppress? Of course, the British East India Company. Violent suppression. All right, so that is sannyasi uprising. Political religious sannyasis were the sadhus, but they were erstwhile soldiers in the armies of Nawab of Awadh or Maratha armies or the armies of the Rajput chiefs. But eventually, when these armies were disbanded, they became Hindu Naga or Giri Sannyasis, but they were the armed rebels. But why they started revolting against British East India Company? The immediate cause was the restrictions imposed by British East India Company on visiting the holy places or holy religious places in Bengal. So they started raiding different British factories and collected cash, arms and ammunitions. This continued for more than 50 years and eventually ended in violent suppression. All right. The third revolt under this heading is Pagalpanthis. Okay. Again, you can assign like this happened between 1830s to 1840s. 1830s to 1840s. Okay. It was led by Karam Shah. Karam Shah was a founder of Pagalpanthis. So it was a panth, as the name suggests, it was a panth. So that panth was called as Pagal Panth, and that is the reason the revolt by them or the followers of this panth used to be called as Pagal Panthis. The revolt by them was called as rebellion by Pagal Panthis. Karam Shah was the founder of this Pagal Panth. Now, what was Pagal Panth? Pagal Panth was a semi-religious sect, semi-religious sect. This Muslim, of course, semi-religious, sort of Muslim religious sect. It had its influence in the northern district of Bengal. So, as far as the location is concerned, again, it was in eastern India, that is Bengal. An activist fervor to the sect was imparted by Tipu Sultan. Tipu at some point, um, but then during Tipu Sultan's time, this was like very small kind of sect. But Karam Shah made it, or the successors of the Karam Shah made it, spread it to the other parts of the region, the other parts of India as well. But then it was majorly located in the eastern part, that is in Bengal. Okay, now what they started doing, why they started revolting. The major cause for their revolt was suppression of tenants, suppression of tenants or suppression of dealers by the zamindars. So if you look at the immediate cause, they were not directly against the British East India Company's rule, but they started by revolting against the zamindars who were like Indians. They were not in British Britishers, or they were not British people from British East India Company. So this revolt was initially against Indians only or Indian zamindars only. Why? Because and again Bengal region. So which land revenue system was prevalent? Permanent settlement, right? So permanent settlement, the intermediary were zamindars, right? No, British East India Company used to collect from zamindars. Zamindars used to collect from tea dealers or landless peasants. Okay, so Pagalpanthi started their revolts against the zamindars who were Indians. Okay, they captured Sherpur. So these the major uh, success of Pagalpanthis lies in the fact, of course, they were the armed rebels, and they managed to capture Sherpur. Sherpur was a small place in Bengal, and they established their own sect, or they established their own rule in that particular area. They managed to establish their own rule in that particular area. Okay, so that was the area of Pagalpanthis. The insurgents extended their activities. Insurgents here means Pagalpanthis. They extended their act once they managed to establish their rule over this area. They extended their activities to Garo Hills, or you can just remember hilly region of Bengal. And they continue to raid British factories, rich zamindars, etc. Again, this entire thing was ended by violent suppression by the Britishers, by British East India Company. All right. So the major success of Pagalpanthis lies in the fact that they managed to establish their own rule. But then this rule was, of course, short-lived. But if you compare them with the rest of the other political religious movements which took place during those 50 or 60 years time, then of course that was their major highlight or major success. The next uprising that we going to discuss under political religious head is Wahhabi movement. You must have heard about this or read about this movement, right? Wahhabi movement. Now, Wahhabi, see, I have written the word movement. It was not a revolt. Revolt was like one-time incident or one-time event. Revolution happens like overnight, or it took place uh, at one particular day or date as such, right? But movement is not like one-time activity. Movement take place over a period of time, over a period of like maybe 5 years or a decade. So Wahhabi, of course, they revolted against British East India Company, but it was not a revolt, one-time incident as such. The Wahhabi revolt was supported by a Wahhabi movement, which happened over, or which took place, or which continued over a period of certain years. Okay, so Wahhabi movement started as it was an Islamic revivalist movement. Okay, you will come across this word quite often, revivalist and reformist. So any movement, थोड़ा सा साइड ट्रैक करके यहाँ पे बता रही हूँ because ये word आया है यहाँ पे तो. Okay, so if you look at any kind of movement, any movement, socio-religious movement which took place in 18th century or early 19th century, can be categorized, can be divided into two categories. One is revivalist and other is reformist. Okay, both Hindu, Muslim, Christian movements will fall under either of these categories. All the social religious movements can be divided into either of these categories. So revivalist, as the name suggests, focuses on revival of one particular religion or culture. Okay, like we have to go back to our own religion. So that is revival, revivaling our own religion. Okay, that is revivalist movement. Major example is of course the Wahhabi movement. As like I said, it was Islamic revivalist movement. Another famous example of revivalist movement was Arya Samaj movement. Reformist, on the other hand, as the name suggests, aimed at reforming the religion and not reviving it, reforming. So, whatever socio-cultural evils are there in your religion, reformist movement used to aim at reforming those evils. All right. Major reformist movement can be major example. We all know Brahmo Samaj, Brahmo movement. Can call it Brahmo movement by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Okay, so you will come across these two terms quite often once you start reading about socio-cultural movements which took place in 18th and 19th century India. So yeah, so let's go back to our topic here. Remember this. Yeah. Wahhabi movement. Wahhabi movement was an Islamic revivalist movement. It was founded by, who was the founder? It was founded by Syed Ahmad of Raebareli. Syed Ahmad of Raebareli, modern day UP. Okay. He was inspired by, this entire movement was inspired by or took its name from the teachings of Abdul Wahab. This was his time period. I'll write early 18th century of Saudi Arabia. Okay. Saeed Ahmed, so why this movement was started? Of course, it was a revivalist movement. So they wanted to revive their old Islamic religion. Why they felt the need to revive the religion? Because of the influence of because Western influence on Islam, because they condemned or they criticized the growing Western influence on Islam and advocated return to their original pure form of Islam and Islamic society. Now, what is pure form of any religion, that we don't want to discuss or get into that part. We just need to remember certain basic facts about the movement, that it was a revivalist movement, it was founded by XYZ person, it was inspired by one international movement which was started in Saudi Arabia and then came to India. And the major aim of this movement, was return to original, or rather pure form of Islam. Okay. Major success of Wahhabi movement was, this was the first movement out of all these pre 1857 era movement which managed to establish or give itself an organization. So they established various smaller sects or smaller organizations throughout India. Wahhabi organizations were established in various parts of India. Someone's speaker is on. Can you mute yourself, whoever that is? Various organizations. They managed to establish various organizations. Now, what they did, a series of military operations against the Britishers. So, if you look at all these political religious movements, whatever we discussed up till now, you will find one common thread, that they um, used violence against British East India Company's rule. So these were not पीसफुल मूवमेंट की कहीं पे सत्याग्रह वगैरह स्टार्ट नहीं किया था. What they did, they were the rebels. They raided British East India Company's factories, almost everybody, each one of them, because of course there was no money wise, there was no support from anybody else. So what they used to do, they used to raid the British East India Company's factories for arms, ammunitions, money. And जो भी arms and ammunitions वहाँ से मिलती थी, they used to use those arms and ammunition against British East India Company in their military operations. So all of them, all, not only Wahhabis, all the political religious revolts which took place before revolt of 1857 used violence as their tactics, as their main agenda. So if agar jo overall characteristic features are there, like features of pre 1857 movement, the major feature would be violence, violent agenda. Okay, so they also use military operations. And now remember, this is one small trick if you want to remember how these movements ended. Almost every movement before revolt of 1857, or whatever revolts happened before revolt of 1857, ended with violence. Okay, because when you use violence against government will suppress that with violence only. ऐसे नहीं कि गवर्नमेंट विल स्टार्ट सत्याग्रह कि नहीं हम सत्याग्रह करेंगे. इफ यू आर एंगेजिंग इन वायलेंस अगेंस्ट द गवर्नमेंट विल रिप्लाई विथ वायलेंस. सो अगर दो पीरियड्स में आप डिवाइड करोगे इन रिवोल्ट्स और मूवमेंट्स को, द मूवमेंट्स विच हैपेंड बिफोर 1857 एंड मूवमेंट्स विच हैपेंड आफ्टर 1857, the major character, the differentiator would be all the movements prior to revolt of 1857 ended by the government through violent suppression, and the movements post revolt of 1857 majorly ended uh, with negotiations, with jail वगैरह करेंगे of course, but then they will not use violence as such. And this feature आप majorly देखोगे in Gandhian era movements. All right. Okay. uh, Another movement under this category. Okay, so the next movement under this category is Farezi Revolt, or next revolt under this category is Farezi Revolt. Okay, Farezi. This was also a Muslim sect. And this sect, Farezi, was a Muslim sect. Sorry. This sect was founded by, Shariat Allah of Faridpur. Again, Farezi movement in Bengal. Now, ये prelims में बहुत बार आया है that there are like two Farezi revolts. Okay, Farezi revolt of Bengal, and then in later half of 19th century there is one more Farezi revolt took place, but that took place in Kerala. So you have to be very clear about the period and then about the region. Okay, both the phrases, but were the revolt by Muslim sects, but then उनके जो basic features थे, they were like different. All right, yeah. So here we are talking about the Farezi sect of Eastern Bengal. Now this Farezi sect, they were the radical religious radical sect. So you can call it as a revivalist radical movement. Okay. Here, their aim was to expel British East India Company. How they did it? This was the aim. How they did it? Again, they raided British factories. for arms, money, and they use, what is their methodology? Their method was simple: violence. Again, the end happened. This revolt ended with violence, or it was suppressed by British East India Company. Okay, because it was a revivalist sort of movement. Again, because they used to engage in violence. Government also used violence against government here, as in British East India Company used violence against them, and it ended with in total suppression. All right. Yeah. So the next, so this is all these revolts happened under one category, that is political religious movement. Now let's go to the next category, that is movement by revolts led by or movements by. Our next category is deposed rulers or zamindars. Now, why deposed rulers? So these deposed rulers were none other than small-time zamindars. All right, these small-time zamindars, they lost their lands due to that method which was introduced by British East India Company, where they used to uh, auction the zamindari. Highest bidder used to get the zamindari. So जो old था वो उसको डिपोज किया जाता था. So of course discontent. It created discontent. Okay, so that is the reason the second category will be revolts by deposers or zamindars. Under this category, the first movement that we're going to discuss is Veluthampi movement. This is a very famous movement. You must have read about it. Veluthampi. The region was Travancore. That is south. All the previous movements that we discussed, they were in eastern part, right? Okay. 1809 to 10. Veluthampa or Veluthampi movement. Okay. All right. As far as Veluthampi movement is concerned, Veluthampi is a name of a person. All right. So uske naam pe ye movement hai. Veluthampi. I'll use the initials. Veluthampi. He was the Diwan of Travancore. He was the Diwan of Travancore. He rose in rebellion against the British East India Company in an attempt to, because what Britishers did, they tried to remove him from the Diwanship. Simple. He was a deposed ruler. So British East India Company tried deposing him, tried removing him. Removing him from the Diwanship, and they impose a heavy burden on his state through subsidiary alliance system. So as a result, as a reply to that attempt, Veluthampi, with the help of his army, revolted against British East India Company. So it was an armed rebellion. It was an armed rebellion. He rose against Britishers, but then British East India Company suppressed him, and he was killed in that suppression. That is how it was suppressed and Veluthampi movement ended. It is Veluthampi. In some books you will see Veluthampa movement, because anyways this is the name of a person. All right. The most important movement under this category is or was Polygar Rebellion. Polygar Rebellion. This happened in Kurnool, that's southern India, 1799 to 1805. Okay. Polygars were the offshoots of the Nayankara system prevalent in the prevalent during Vijayanagar's administration. So, like that is the reason I said polygars were nothing but the zamindars in the southern India. They were the military zamindars. They used to raise their own armies, or they used to raise their own military. That is and they were called as polygars. The polygars were similar to the Rajputs of North India, and they were given land in exchange for their military services. So, like Jagirdari and like Jagirdars under Mughals, Vijayanagar administration had appointed some Nayankaras, and out of that Nayankara system, the later part of, in later years, in later centuries, emerged the Polygar system of administration. So polygars were simply put, they were the zamindars of southern India. Okay, so they used to get land in exchange of their military services. However, their influence and power increased beyond the traditional lines, and they often acted as their own sovereigns. Like, for example, Shahaji Raje Bhosle, who was father of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he was also Jagirdar in the western region of India, right? So, but then he had his own army. He used to rule as per his own rules and regulations. Chhatrapati Shivaji created his own kingdom. That is a different case altogether. But then they were the Jagirdars. So same in a similar manner, these polygars, they had their own land, they had their own army, they used to provide that military services in exchange of that land. But in course of time they grew bigger and bigger, and their influence and power increased beyond their traditional lines. But then as a company's government wanted to augment its own sources of revenue, they sought control over the polygars, because polygars were the is like it was the obstacle in the path of British East India Company's expansion in southern India, because they wanted complete control over land revenue, and that the polygars already had traditionally had control over land, and they had control over the military resources. Because of this tussle between British East India Company and polygars resulted into polygar uprising. Okay. The main leader of this uprising was Kattaboma Nayaka. Kattaboma Nayaka was the main leader of this Polygar uprising. So, in some books, this uprising was called as Polygar Wars. Polygar War. Okay, because it was a proper armed rebellion. Okay. And this ended in 1805 after two wars. So there were like two Polygar wars. And it ended with the defeat of Polygars. That means it ended with violent suppression. Violent suppression by the British East India Company. Okay. Now, the third part, the third category here, revolts by the deposed rulers. This is the final category. Revolts by deposed rulers. Revolts by deposed rulers. Okay. the major uprising under this heading is Ramosi uprising. We will look at only one uprising here because that is the only important uprising. Sawantwadi revolt and everything is not important for you at this level. You may read about them in your NCRT books, but we will be discussing only Ramosi uprising. (1822). Okay. So the Ramosis, they were the low rank. They were the low rank army officers. Sorry, army, and they were the low rank soldiers in Maratha army. So once Maratha army was disbanded after Bajirao II was deposed, Maratha army was disbanded. Once it was disbanded, the Ramosis, under the leadership of Chittur Singh, they rebelled against British East India Company. The major reason was heavy assessment of land revenue. Heavy land revenue imposed by British East India Company. They rose against British East India Company twice. So there were like two Ramosi uprising. First, it was land revenue. Second, it was second time it was due to famine. Okay, but finally, British government managed to suppress them with violence, violent suppression. Okay, so yeah, under the third category, only the most important one is Ramosi uprising. So we will be looking only at that and not other movements. All right. So all these three movements, or sorry, all these three categories or all these movements, whatever we discussed up till now, took place before the revolt of 1857. All right, before the revolt of 1857, and this was a first response, first Indian response to British East India Company. That was the traditional response. First traditional response by Indians to British East India Company's rule. Now, after this, we will, before we start with modern, of course, the major event, the major revolt, जिसका हम wait कर रहे थे, like the defining movement in India's history, that was revolt of 1857. So before we start with revolt of 1857, please let me know if you have any doubt up till here. Whatever we discussed, like all these revolts, I know you might be feeling very bored or something, but then iske upar questions aate. That is the reason we tried discussing these revolts in bit detailed manner. Very easy, right? So if you have any doubt up till here, please ask me. Otherwise, I'll start with revolt of 1857. Yes, yes, no, what? Otherwise, I'll start with revolt of 1857. All right. So let me just share my screen with you. So all these revolts, they in a way paved the way for revolt of 1857. They created that background for the revolt of 1857, which, or the final culmination of all these revolts, जो भी last 50 साल से हो रहे थे, the culmination point was revolt of 1857 eventually. All right. So of course, revolt of 1857. happened overnight, right? Like there was an immediate cause, but then all these revolts, they paved the way for revolt of 1857. They created that kind of background, they created that kind of atmosphere in Indian subcontinent, so that the people felt the need to, rather than masses, I would say the classes who were involved in all these background revolts, they felt the need to come together and rebel or revolt against British East India Company's authority or British East India Company's rule in India, which eventually gave us Revolt of 1857. So I'll start with Revolt of 1857. Let me share my screen here. Okay, 1 second. Mhm. Yeah. I'll take Revolt of 1857 very quickly because I guess we have been reading about Revolt of 1857 since the time we study or we have been reading about history, Indian history. So causes, revolt, impact. Okay, three categories. Okay, what was the background? So we'll first look at the general reasons for the revolt of 1857. Immediate cause of revolt of 1857, we all know, that was that rumor which was going around, that there was mixing of bone dust in the atta or the roti ka jo flour banta hai wo, in military. Okay, in the military, introduction of Enfield rifle. Now how these two are interlinked or connected, bone dust in atta and Enfield rifles also had, they had introduced a new cartridge of the new rifle. This new cartridge had to be bitten off before loading. Okay, so there was a rumor that the cartridge, the grease was reportedly made up of beef and pig fat. Now, beef, that is cow meat, cow was sacred in Hindu religion, and pig was not sacred or is not sacred in Islamic religion, right? And if you look at the military, British East India Company's soldiers at that level, during that time, they were mixed of Hindu and Muslim Indians, Hindu and Muslim soldiers from India. So this introduction of Enfield rifles and this bone dust, both of them were like rumors, but then this impacted this section of Indian military or British East India Company's military in India. They again and again they summon or they requested British East India Company to look into the matter, but the administration did nothing to allay the fears of the military or Indian soldiers. The sepoys felt that their religion is in grave danger. And if you look at all the religious movements up till that particular time, okay, whatever we discussed under that heading, political religious revolts, sannyasi or Pagal Panthis or Farezi, all these movements or revolts, time and again, they highlighted the idea that the British East India Company or the Western ruler is trying to interfere and destroy our religions, be it Hindu religion or Islamic religion. Okay, either religion, any religion for that matter. They are trying to destroy our socio-cultural religious values. All those events supported by this particular one event resulted into that aggravating that fear that yes, British East India Company deliberately trying to create issues or create inter-disturbance in our religious life. All right. Yeah, this is just for your reference. So Enfield rifle, ये Enfield rifle है. So जो भी grease cartridge यहाँ पे आता था, they have to, the soldier had to tear open the end of the cartridge with the teeth, and then put it and then fire. Okay. So this particular grease cartridge, it was rumored that it had beef and pig meat. All right. That picture was only for your reference. Okay. So on 24th April 1857, 3rd Native Cavalry refused to accept the greased cartridges. Like I said, वो request तो उन्होंने बहुत की थी कि like you need to roll back this reform. We will not use Enfield rifles वगैरह वगैरह. But then they never, British East India Company never responded. That is the reason, as a reaction, 3rd Native Cavalry refused to accept the grease cartridges. Then, May 3rd, Awadh Regiment defied its officers' order to use the rifle. Now, why I have mentioned all these events? Because this is to show that Mangal Pandey did not, overnight came in picture. Ki immediately koi ek sipoy aaya and then he started this thing. There was a background to it. Of course, Enfield rifle is an immediate cause. All right. Before that, also many uprisings had happened, and then support those uprisings plus the immediate cause, and then all these requests or when the requests were refused, people from different segments of British East India Company's military started revolting, and then Mangal Pandey happened. Okay, May 10, the soldiers released their imprisoned comrades, killed their officers, and they started the revolt. That they revolted against British East India Company. That we will not use anything. We will not cooperate with British East India Company, and they started moving towards Delhi. Now, why Delhi? Because till now, the Indian psyche was that Mughal ruler is the real ruler, real Raja Maharaja of real emperor of Indian subcontinent or India. Though this ruler was aged and powerless, that is Bahadur Shah Zafar the second. It should be second, okay. Bahadur Shah Zafar the second, but then still he was the ruler for Indians, or for symbolic ruler for Indians or Indian people, and that is the reason all these Indian soldiers, they started moving towards Delhi, and they declared Bahadur Shah Zafar proclaimed as the Emperor of India, and then eventually that particular event indicated start of revolt of 1857, which eventually spread to the different parts of the country. Okay, so who all participated in the revolt of 1857? Another important point from prelims point of view. Who all participated in revolt of 1857? So kings, queens, now erstwhile kings and queens, zamindars, civilians, peasants, workers, clerics of Muslim community. Okay, places involved in the revolt of 1857. So if you look at these triangles, okay, only these areas came under revolt of 1857. So what is the characteristic feature of this map? The revolt spread only, or was rather limited, in northernmost part of India. This is one of the features as well as one of the reasons for the failure of revolt of 1857, because it was limited only in northern part of Indian subcontinent. So if you can see that Amroha, Multan, Bareilly, Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow, okay, also very limited, or very located in northern part of India. Southern में इतना है ही नहीं, like there is no section of southern India was actively involved in revolt of 1857. Okay, yeah. Reasons, immediate reason and fundamental reasons. Immediate reason, we all know immediate cause was grease cartridge, in introduction of Enfield rifle. Fundamental reasons: political, economic, social, cultural, military influence of outside events. We already have discussed all these reasons, but then I'll again revise the same. Okay, political causes or fundamental reasons can be categorized into various other subcategories. Political causes में East India Company's policy of effective control. Now, how effective control? Through various acts, rules, regulations. If you remember, we had discussed Regulating Act of 1773 or Pitt's India Act of 1784 and various charter acts. So, if you look at all those acts, policies, and schemes introduced by British East India Company in the form of subsidiary alliance system or doctrine of lapse, the the characteristic feature of all these policies was to introduce effective control over the ruled, that is, over the Indian subcontinent. Now, this control was in various forms, but the first they started controlling, having the economic control. Okay, they introduced different policies, rules and regulations through which they created a political system which is heavily centralized, and the power centralized in a sense, the power was the power was located or yeah, located in the hands of very few, and that too British people. There was no Indian in the entire administrative mechanism. The British East India Company tried establishing their effective control over Indians through these policies and programs. Okay, the in the process of establishing that effective control through these policies, they all these policies resulted into extinction of native Indian states. All right, we while discussing subsidiary alliance or while discussing various that how regional Indian states were defeated and British East India Company managed to establish their control. Under that, we had seen how slowly but surely British East India Company spread its rule over entire Indian subcontinent. First, they took Bengal, then Mysore, then Marathas, then Awadh, Delhi, Sindh, the Punjab, and all. So by 1850s, by the time of revolt of 1857, all the native Indian states were extinct and entire effective political control had been established by British East India Company. Now, feelings of Muslims getting hurt due to ill treatment given to Bahadur Shah II. Now, of course, it was not only, it would be wrong to say it was just Muslim feelings which were hurt, because people used to look at him as the emperor of India. Of course, he belonged to one particular religion, but then it was the mixed feeling, like he was treated badly, and that was it ended up hurting the sentiments of the people of, especially northern part of India. Then the economic and administrative reason. Again, we had discussed all these reasons in the previous classes. Land revenue settlement. We saw how through various land revenue policies, through various trial and error basis पे उन्होंने जो भी policies and programs introduce किए थे, it resulted in the destruction of Indian agriculture, complete destruction of Indian agriculture, and how it created a different class of landless laborers or tillers. Heavy taxation on peasants, new policies of Rayatwari, Mahalwari. Just ignore the images. That is only for the fun part. Okay. Talukdars, zamindars getting deprived and confiscation of their estates, lands, exploitation of peasants by the money lenders. We have already discussed all these points under that land revenue policy wala part. It eventually resulted into breaking up of Indian handicraft industry due to breaking up of Indian agriculture due to all these faulty policies introduced by Britishers. Now, this entire administrative machinery, which was introduced by British East India Company, had rampant corruption. Indian soldiers and civil servants used to get less salary, lesser, no higher post was given to them, ill treatment and all. Okay. This is just for reference how British East India Company's political and administrative and economic policies ended up destroying the entire political socio-cultural fabric of India. Third and most important reason for revolt of 1857 can be social and religious interference by British East India Company. Of course, various religious policies and of interference by British East India Company in the religious matters of India, be it for good reasons or bad reasons. Indian people perceived it to be the interference by the foreigners in their own religious, socio-cultural practices. And then it was the missionaries were given free hand for in spreading Christianity. So they sometimes it was forceful, sometimes it was through education, sometimes it was via various laws, rules, and regulations. So the Indian religious people looked at all these reforms, like Sati Abolition Act, or Women Remarriage Act, or Widow Remarriage Act, or English education. Traditional conservative Indian people looked at it as undue interference by a foreign religion into India's socio-cultural fabric. Okay. Then, okay, again, religious taxation, which was introduced by Britishers, can be another reason, which will fall under socio-cultural reasons. Then, military causes. Military causes, the Indian soldiers, they used to made to serve away from home without paying them any extra bhatta. They crossing of sea. So all these three things: overseas camping, crossing the sea, and sinful for soldiers. Overseas camping, eating and drinking whatever that comes into way. Crossing the sea, in Hindu religion or in many Indian religions, crossing the sea is considered as bad for their, or used to be considered as bad for religion. But these soldiers had to cross sea for fighting various wars for British Empire in different parts of the world. Okay. Then such soldiers, once they came back, Indian people, they used to ostracize them. They were not taken back into their caste or even barracks or regiments. Okay. And then extensive military campaigns at the cost of Indian soldiers. So that is the reason many people will used to consider soldiers as peasant in uniform. That is whatever the faulty agricultural land revenue policies created that uh, resulted into complete separation of Indian agriculture. Similar way, all these socio-cultural religious policies resulted into separation of or resulted into uh, ended up alienating conservative Indians. The British East India Company ended up alienating conservative Indian soldiers, uh, erstwhile zamindars and rajas. Under the category of fundamental reason, influence of outside events. Outside here means outside Indian subcontinent. British suffered serious losses. First Indo-Afghan war was going on. Punjab wars, 1845-49, Crimean wars, Santhal rebellion. You don't have to get into all that. So all these reasons supported, and the immediate cause of Enfield rifle resulted into revolt of 1857. Immediate cause वो होता है that after that cause the event starts. All right. So all these reasons together plus the immediate cause resulted into beginning of revolt of 1857. Now, what was the nature of the revolt of 1857? It was the revolt of 1857 is perceived differently by nationalist and colonial historians. So, for nationalist, nature of revolt of 1857 would be, of course, be different, and for colonial historians, it would be different, depending upon their socio-ideological beliefs. Views of nationalist historians are constantly changing. Like जो 40 साल पहले views थे historians के, वो अभी होंगे ही ऐसे नहीं है. They will keep on changing in the future as well. Okay, so what is the nature of revolt as per the colonial historians? So, of course, it is a general tendency for them to deny the patriotic and popular character of revolt of 1857. They will highlight the elements of disunity, disorganization. They will call it they will give a selfish character to the revolt of 1857. They they did not accept the element of general discontent or grievances of Indian people, which had accumulated over the period of time as a result of the exploitative nature of the British policies. So what they'll say, ki, okay, what they did were the colonial rulers or the colonial historians, they thought or they had projected revolt of 1857 as something which has no popular character. They called it as like one minor incident in the entire history of India, and then they deny the patriotic nature of the revolt of 1857. They said that there was no idea of India, and that is the reason none of the people who revolted. Um, Somebody asked something, I guess. Let me just go back and check. Can you show last slide? Which slide? Okay, wait. Okay, let me go back and share the last slide. Fundamental reasons one. Okay, don't worry, I'll just share every slide with you. So let's just continue with this part first. Okay, so amongst this the British historians, Sir John Lawrence Silly, he called revolt of 1857 as Sepoy Mutiny, and he called it patriotic and selfish. Uh, it was war of religious fanatics, Hindu Muslims against the Christians. So if you look at the statements here, you will see that they try to give a a faulty character, or as they tried to project revolt of 1857 as a small incident which happened in the entire history. They tried to give it a religious color or religious revolt and all, because they were writing it from their side. They were writing it from British East India Company's or Britishers side. That is the reason they talked about revolt of 1857 as less patriotic or no patriotic or mere sepoy mutiny. On the other hand, if you look at nationalist historians, that is Indian historians, and if you look at revolt of 1857 from their perspective, so they gave a revolt of 1857 as very very patriotic character. Uh, and that is the reason we study revolt of 1857 as a defining movement in India's freedom struggle. Why? Because we feel that it was the first Indian response, or where Indians came together and revolted against British East India Company's rule. That is, it was a war which started for the protection of, but then among nationalist historian also there are like various other viewpoints. That is the reason I said na, ki over the period of time all these viewpoints are changing. But then among nationalist historian, the right wing and the central wing, politically, they consider revolt of 18 nature of revolt of 1857 from different perspective. So for example, for VD Savarkar, it was first war of Indian national independence, because he tried to give revolt of 1857 that nationalist character, wherein he saw revolt of 1857 as a first major incident, first major response by Indians against the British East India Company's rule. On the other hand, R.C. Majumdar said that it was neither first nor national war of independence. Now, that doesn't mean that he denied the patriotic character or patriotic nature of revolt of 1857. It was just way of understanding that particular event in the course of India's freedom struggle. So, in the course of India's freedom struggle, he felt that it was not first, because before revolt of, why it was not first? Because before revolt of 1857, there were other revolts that had happened that we already discussed, right? Nor national nor war of independence. Why not national? Because of the overall character, the location. The revolt of 1857 was greatly located in the northern part of India, and that is the reason for many Indian historians as well. It was not it didn't have a national character, right? And then it was not war of independence. Why not war of independence? Because One second. It was not war of independence for most of them because it again the character, if you look at the character of the revolt, it was not spread across, it didn't spread across entire Indian subcontinent, or forget about subcontinent, not over across entire India. It was greatly limited to the northern part, and that is the reason you cannot call it as a war of independence or a national war of independence as such, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to just wait a second. This slide is not going ahead. Let me just check. Yeah. Okay, let's quickly discuss the reasons or the causes for the failure of revolt of 1857. Yeah. One of the major reasons for the failure of revolt of 1857 was crucial support of certain sections of Indian public to British authorities. Now, if you look at the people who participated in the revolt of 1857, were basically the peasants, the erstwhile zamindars, or the deposed rulers, or rajas, maharajas, the artisans who had lost, or who were or the Indian soldiers in the in military in British East India Company's army. But then, what about the newly emerging middle class or newly emerging urban centers of India, like Bombay, Madras, Bengal Presidency, the newly educated, highly educated foreign written class? These people did not participate, or rather, the Indian middle class and the geographically people who were in the southern part of India did not participate in this particular revolt, and that is the reason it lacked the critical support from the mass section of Indian society. That is one of the reasons for the failure of this revolt. Bombay and Madras armies remain loyal. Now, within armies also, if you look at Bombay and Madras armies, they remain loyal to British East India companies. Limited territorial spread or social base. Territorially also, it was limited only to northern part. I'm again highlighting that thing. Socially, if you look at the social base of the revolt, social base was limited. I'm sorry. In a sense, that it had only people belonging to one particular social base, like either the highest social order or the lowest one. The deposed zamindars at the highest rung of the society, or the peasants and the landless tillers, they were the lowest rung of the society. The middle class, the larger Indian middle class, remain aloof from the entire revolt of 1857, and that is the reason it had very limited social base. Okay, yeah. Look at this map. So the epicenter is northern India, and it remained in northern India. Okay, it didn't spread to any other part. It was not even entire northern India. It was like north and some part of eastern India. That is it. These were the centers of revolt of 1857. You might you have to remember these centers like Jhansi, Allahabad, Azamgarh, Gwalior, and all. Okay. Outburst was only in Western Bihar, Awadh, Rohilkhand, Delhi were like main centers of revolt of 1857. And of course, they lacked the resources, military resources, money resources, communication resources as compared to that of British East India companies. Again, superiority of British army, discipline, use of modern means of communication, the rebels of those who participated in the revolt of 1857, they lacked all these resources. Then overall character of revolt of 1857 is one of the reasons for the failure of this revolt. Okay, feudal, because it was feudal in character. It was, there was no coordination, there was no central leadership. If you look at that, at different in different areas, different people led the revolt, different people started the revolt. Okay, and there was no central leadership, there was no one political perspective, everybody was fighting for their own this thing. Like Nana Sahib was fighting because he was a deposed ruler. Bahadur Shah Zafar was nowhere in the revolt, he was forced into the revolt, he was forced by the people because they by that military people who declared him as the emperor of India, because he was very weak and old, 80 years plus, and he was like, why you guys made me Shahenshah or the emperor, because he was anyways aloof from politics by that time. So everybody who participated in this particular revolt were fighting for their own reasons. There was no one particular coherent ideology. Okay, this slide is important because ये बार बार आता है prelims में, leaders of the revolt of 1857. Okay, and the region. So from Kanpur, Nana Sahib, he was the adopted son of Bajirao II, brother of Rani Lakshmi Bai. Begum Hazrat Mahal from Lucknow. Khan Bahadur in Bareilly, he was the descendant of the former ruler of Rohilkhand. Royal Ujjaini House, the revolt was led by Kanwar Singh, Jagdishpur. Okay, remember this. ये बार बार आया. Maulavi Ahmedullah of Faizabad, Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. So Kanwar Singh, Jagdishpur, this is in Bihar. Okay, so कभी कभी ये match the column में they will just put Bihar and give Kanwar Singh. So don't get confused. Okay. So this impact we will see in greater details in the form of Government of India Act 1858, because this revolt changed the entire atmosphere. This revolt resulted into change of entire or overthrow British East India Company's rule in India. This resulted into creation of new socio-political um, fabric in India. So impact were long lasting. So we will discuss the impact or the result of revolt of 1857 in the form of, mainly in the form of uh, British India Act of 1857 or Queen's Declaration. It is also called as Queen's Proclamation of 1858, not 1857, 1858. But then, just excuse me today. I want to stop here today. As you can see, I'm not well. I'm feeling bit under the weather, so I'll stop here. And I'll continue with the impact and remaining topics in the next class maybe, but just excuse me for today. uh, we will stop the class here and we'll continue in the next lecture. All right, thank you.